name's JC McCauley.
I'm McCauley, and you're watching accesstv.org.
Good afternoon, and welcome. I'm Rich Armstrong with the DOT. It's been a while. I guess we were last here in late June, and so I hope you all had a great summer and a great fall. The teams have been hard at work. We've been very, very busy. And when I say teams, I'm talking about the i84 Hartford team and then the city team and their consultants. And it's really been a great collaboration. We've worked very well together. We have a single mindset, focusing on, especially today, you'll see what we've been doing, working on the multimodal station planning effort in Asylum Hill and the street network and ramp connections and things such as that, and the opportunities for development. So we have a very full agenda. It's pretty dense with information. Mike Morehouse is going to kind of facilitate questions and answers and comments. So with that, I'll get into our specific agenda. We are going to recap a little bit of that last session where I think we first introduced some of the multimodal station concepts. Talk a little bit about the road network opportunities, and those are the city streets in and around that same area. We'll a deep dive into the multimodal station planning effort. I'm going to touch for 1 minute on the i84 I-91 interchange, give you a very brief update on that. And then we'll talk about next steps. I also would like to make mention and introduce Elsa Huertas from SINA, who's a new member, so welcome. And anybody else who is new to the group? Yes?
From Trinity College.
Oh, from Trinity College, thanks, and welcome. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Morehouse.
I think there's one more.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joyce? Joyce. And you're with Coalition to Strengthen Sheldon Charter Road. And oh, by the way, I'm not sure we're going to talk about our public outreach. We did have a work session in August, 2 work sessions in August on the multimodal station, and then a repeat, well, it wasn't a repeat, but same subject matter in late October, a few weeks ago. And I know several of you from the PAC attended those. If you didn't attend and you're interested, you can go to the project website and you can see the videos. Great, thanks. And I'll turn it over to Mike.
Good afternoon. I guess the group keeps getting bigger. The food must be getting better. So we do have a lot to cover today in an hour and a half, and we do want to keep it to an hour and a half. So I'm going to try to help moderate the session. There's a lot of content, but we also want to make sure that we're clear and everything is really understandable. I know sometimes the graphics are hard to read and hard to interpret, especially if you haven't looked at them for a long time like we have. But we're going to do our best to try to pause in between various sessions and ask questions. And if anybody doesn't understand something, please raise your hand. We'll answer the question right in the process of the presentation. But I just wanted to start by recapping. We were here, I guess, last June, was it? And at that time, we spoke a little bit about the preferred or the I'm sorry, I skipped the slide. Let me start with today's objective. And I think Rich kind of covered this, but we do want to update you on the interaction between the city's consultants and the i84 project team. And they have been working iteratively back and forth, so there's a lot of new stuff. But we do want to hear your concerns. So again, please make sure that you pause, let us know if you have a question, and we don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. But we are moving towards trying to develop a preferred concept. We want to know which road configurations make sense, which station configurations make sense. We are on the verge of really getting this into a NEPA process where we have to really start to evaluate all the environmental impacts. So it's important that we continue to move forward and not belabor the, even though it's very important that we continue to be thoughtful about our planning, we do want to make sure that we're moving forward and ultimately, not tying up the timeline too much with a lot of just, ideas that aren't feasible. And so you're going to start to see a refinement of some thinking in today's presentation. So yes, back in June, We presented the 3 eastern options, highway options, and the 1 western highway option that we think work the best. I think we're pretty much all on board with those ideas. We've spent many years refining those, and I think they're in pretty good shape. But we also presented, I guess for the first time, a series of new multimodal station concepts. As we move the rail, we have to rethink what the rail station and the bus facility and all that is going to be. You know, and then we talked about the various road configurations that need to accommodate all that. What's going to happen at the Trident? What will happen with the ramps and where they touch down on the local street system? So there was a lot of information given at that meeting. We decided the best way to handle additional dialogue was to have a couple of working sessions, the first of which was held in August. And I think if some of you were at that meeting, you know that we really try to stuff a lot of content into 2 meetings, into 2 sessions. But we didn't quite, I think, get to everything we wanted to get to. We did talk a little bit about these street connections, but we really started to dive for the first time into the different layouts for the station. And there was a lot of graphics that we threw at everybody. It was probably a little overwhelming. And what we ultimately decided that we needed to have a follow-up working session to really dive down into these things in greater detail and simplify the graphics that we had developed. So we did that. We met in October. We came up with some refinements to the lowered highway alternative, which Casey from Trans Systems will go through in a few minutes. We also worked really hard on coming up with a broad range of options to address the Trident area, where the Asylum and Farmington come together. And you're going to see some of the, I think, the ideas that have come from that discussion. And again, no home run solution yet, but I think we've arrived at a few things that are definitely workable. And then again, we're gonna show you the latest thinking on our multimodal station concept. So I did want to just pause though really briefly because a number of you had attended these workshops, and if anybody wants to provide some feedback or have any thoughts, does anybody want to give their no comments? Okay. Well, we do appreciate the members of the PAC that did come to those because it was really informative for us. So just to get into the road network options, when we met again in October, we really started to think about these 4 areas, mainly where the ramps touch down, at Myrtle Street and the possible impacts to the Ashley neighborhood. We wanted to address that, and we have some new ideas on how to improve that, as well as a new connection. An extension of Garden Street across the highway, which would provide another connection north-south across I84. And then these 2 kind of interrelated areas, the Trident area and this area kind of south of the highway where the new ramps are going to touch down to the new boulevard next to Bushnell Park. These are really all interrelated, and to further sort of complicate the issue, they're all important because depending on which station concept, north or south of Asylum we go with, that may dictate different road network options. So we're trying to look at all these things together, and as you can imagine, it's very complicated, but we're going to walk through a presentation largely involving this area today. But I want to invite Casey to come up here and start that conversation, and Nick Mandler will be running the 3D model, so if there's any visualizations that we need to see that will help us communicate this better, just let us know and we'll go to those areas.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, Mike. Bear with me. I'm just getting my laser pointer set. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the areas that Mike introduced on this slide. The Garden Street piece, the association with traffic towards the Asylum Hill neighborhood, Ashley Street, and then the Trident. And actually later, in kind of the second module, this area here where the eastbound ramps are, kind of near Bushnell Park, that'll be discussed, really intermixed with the multimodal station planning. So I wanted to start just by kind of resetting everyone where we were at in June. So that's the last time we presented to this group with lowered highway alternative. This is our eastern interchange option 3BE5. So we're really looking at the eastern part of our project area. Here's Broad Street, and then the map extends to about Trumbull Street. So remember with the lowered highway, the kind of big first piece of it is that relocated railroad shown with this red line work, which would go underneath Broad, Farmington and Asylum, rail platforms in this general area, and then continue to the north under Walnut, and then Albany and Maine. So again, where does it go today? Today it comes under I-84, around Bushnell Park, Union Station's right here, under I-84 again, and then matches up really where our line work is up in the Walnut Street area. So again, that relocation of the railroad is what allows us to drop the highway down to grade. So that means this yellow band here, which is the proposed I-84, would go beneath Broad Street, would go beneath Asylum, continue around into that kind of canyon area we have today, under High, under and Ucello Streets. In terms of the location of that highway, it would be shifted about 200 feet west, really in the area of Asylum Street, and that's to address that deficient horizontal curve just to the north of where Union Station is. So that curve radius is sharper than we'd like by today's standards. There's a bit of a crash history there. We see that as a safety improvement. In terms of ramping, here in the eastern part of the project area, we propose eastbound off and on ramps to a new road, which would connect Capitol up to Asylum, and westbound off and on ramps at a relocated Codswell Street. Today, Codswell Street comes up to intersect with Myrtle and Garden. We're proposing to realign it, ramps to here, and then it really matches into Edward Street at the intersection with Walnut. So we wanted to highlight, so this again is the version of this alternative we had back in June. So we wanted to highlight some of the new connections that are inherent in that proposal. So that new road I mentioned from Capitol to Asylum, Road A or Bushnell Park West, that's that new north-south roadway that's not there today. We're proposing to extend Spruce Street, right? Today Spruce Street ends at Church. So we're proposing to bring it all the way around into Chapel Street South. So that's a kind of a new extension that creates kind of one long street that would start all the way down to Capitol and would extend over to the river. And then we have that new east-west roadway, which would connect Broad and that new Road A, Bushnell Park West. So in addition to those new connections, we see opportunities here to really improve the character of Asylum and Broad. So today you have on or off ramps on each of those roadways. Under this proposal, you would have none. So there's a real opportunity to really strengthen the way those streets serve as not just ways to move cars around, but for people between the neighborhoods and the city. We do show, as part of this alternative, a disconnection of Broad Street at Farmington and Asylum. That is but one of several options we have for how we treat the Trident, and I'll be talking a lot more about that in the next few slides. So Mike kind of touched on these. You know, the four real focus areas of our work over the last several months have been looking at that new connection across the highway, which I'll talk a lot about, looking at addressing some comments we've received about the perception that the new ramp system might push traffic towards some residential streets in Asylum Hill. The Trident, and we've heard from pretty much every cross-section of our advisory committee, stakeholders, and the public how important it is for us to find a good solution there. And then when we talk about the station, this area, which we do envision as potentially being capped as part of the lowered highway alternative, which maybe Nick can show you. So he's got a piece on this screen here. So this is the area where we're talking about potentially capping between Broad Street and Asylum. So the things we're looking at there could involve that. How, you know, could a local street be connected there? You know, what are some options there? So for that first focus area, we've talked a lot to this group about how we could improve connectivity over the highway. So today there is Myrtle Street, which comes down the hill, goes under the highway, and matches in with Church. So that connection is here today. And with the lowered highway, we can't maintain it in that configuration. The lowered highway would be at the same grade as that roadway. So with some of our other interchange options, we've come up with some different ways to address that. Is Darth Vader going to come in?
Sorry about
that. But one of the detriments of this interchange option had been an inability to do that with kind of the location of the ramping system, the local streets. We kind of struggled to find a way to connect that. And through our collaboration with Tom Jost and Bill, the city's consultant team, we've kind of been able to identify a way we weren't looking at it before, which is to extend Darden Street. Today Darden Street kind of comes here and angles down into where the Asylum ramp comes in. The idea here is to really just extend it over the highway all the way to Spruce Street, and that would obviously add an east-west connection. We like redundancy in the road network. Here's a little clearer picture of what that could look like. It's this kind of yellow and orange piece here, where the orange would denote the bridge over the railroad and the highway. So that redundancy from an east-west perspective is really helpful to us. Many of you know the struggles we've had with traffic at the Trident, the struggles we have today under this new lowered highway alternative. There's just a lot of traffic trying to make its way through that intersection. So any redundancy we can provide in the roadway network can help draw traffic out of that and make that operate better. But in addition to being an east-west crossing of the highway, we see an opportunity to help facilitate north-south movement as well, because you could start from Capitol Avenue, take that new Bushnell Park West or Road A, take that north to Asylum, continue through, take a left and go up Garden Street, and that could be another way for people to go from Frog Hollow to Asylum Hill to Frog Hollow. Now, we do want to mention the grade. The roadway is going from a higher point on the hill than Asylum goes to, so it would be about the same grade as Asylum. We're looking kind of iteratively at the best way to work with that. We're looking at Spruce Street towards the bottom of the hill. Can we raise that a little bit? So I think as we continue to look at this Darden Street extension, those are details we're working to try and bring the public and to you early in the next year. So I'm going to move on to the second focus area, which is, we're calling it the Ashley Street traffic mitigation. So we've heard quite a few comments when we first proposed this ramp system, and I've zoomed out here. You can kind of see that the western extent of this map would be the St. Francis Hospital campus. Here's that ramp system that relocated Cogswell Street, Fraser Place. So today, the kind of primary east-west traffic route from I84 to St. Francis is Collins Street. So today you would come off I84 if you're coming from the east, off Asylum, go up Garden, and then you're on Collins right to St. Francis. And one of the questions or critiques of this alternative had been that it appeared that the ramping system really points cars in a direction that would take them to a more residential area towards Ashley Street, the Sargent Street residential neighborhood of Asylum Hill. So, being engineers, we do like to draw roads, so we put pen to paper and tried to come up with some ways to change the road network that might make that more conducive to fitting traffic patterns as they are today. Oops. So first we kind of had this idea of looping Fraser Place around to Garden Street. That's a little bit more roundabout. It would impact some property that's owned by the Hartford that they have parking on. So that was one thing we looked at. A second thing we looked at was introducing basically an S-curve into that Fraser Place that lines it up with Collins. That cuts kind of right through that McGee Park, part of the Hartford's campus. That was sort of another, property impact that we looked to avoid. And ultimately, we think we've come up with a pretty simple solution that addresses the problem and essentially replicates the traffic patterns today, where we basically, instead of having the ramps lead to Fraser Place, they now lead to Myrtle Street, which wraps around right to Garden and kind of facilitates a similar movement to what you have today. And this would, no city streets would need to be closed because of this, and ultimately would improve traffic operations at these intersections. This intersection with Fraser Place would not need to be signalized, and basically we're turning a lot of what would be left turns at a traffic signal into just people going straight, and that's a lot more efficient.
Casey, just before you move on, are there any questions or is there any confusion over those two options that Casey just presented? Jackie.
So what you're changing is the Asylum Street exit ramp, right?
Yeah, as part of this lowered highway interchange option, the Asylum off-ramp, which comes here today to Asylum, is pushed back today and goes up to that relocated Cogswell Street / Edward Street.
Okay, so the ramp isn't really moving, it's the feed into the public streets, it's gonna.
That's right, it's that
It'll be
those-
sooner,
That's right.
okay.
right.
I got it.
What are the two options? What are the two options?
I think he's talking about these two.
I mean, you mentioned two options.
No, when the Garden Street crossover, the new connection, that would replace Myrtle, and the one he's talking about there, for the realignment.
Okay, and the second one is the one you just wrote.
No, these both would happen together.
Oh, they would both?
Yeah, so let me advance because the next slide kind of deals with that. So basically what we're saying is we're taking this is how the interchange option looked before, where Fraser Place went all the way up, lined up with Ashley, no Garden Street. So we're looking at adding that Garden Street, making that change near Myrtle Street, and then ultimately that's what the, what the kind of current version of the alternative could look like now. So that's,
So the westbound off-ramp would lead directly into Middle Street?
that's correct.
And in addition, you would do the S-shaped curve into Collins?
No, we would, so this is just, this street just lines up to right where Fraser Place is today. So Fraser Place continues up to where it does today, and it just kind of tees into this as a side road. So this is Myrtle, and that's Fraser.
Still look like you're not clear on it. Because we're going to talk about the Trident next, so it doesn't get any easier. I want to just make sure we're good on this. Okay.
Well, I have another question then. What impact does that have on traffic that's going to the Etna and the Hartford? It looks like it favors the Hartford, but it sort of gobs up the Etna. Is that,
So I think
How bottles
the two changes that I talked about wouldn't really affect how traffic goes to Etna. They would probably either be taking this direct left off the ramp, or they would be just going all the way to Sidonie Street. So under any revision to this street network, I don't think that really affects how people get to Etna. And ultimately, I think it still really does feed into the Hartford's parking areas in a similar manner. We'll certainly look at how those various turning movements work just to make sure they're.
Okay. Thanks, Casey.
You're welcome. So as Mike kind of teased for me, the next part here is focusing on that Trident area. And, as many of you experience on a daily basis, the existing operations are poor, particularly in the afternoons. One of the first things I want to start with is just kind of reinforce this change in the i84 ramp system, which has a change in how vehicular traffic certainly would use the Trident. And that's it today. This is Broad Street. I know it's a little hard to see in the grayed out map, but today there's that eastbound on-ramp from Broad Street, and that carries a significant volume of traffic, particularly during the afternoon, where people are getting on the highway to go east or to go to 91 north or south. So under the proposed lower highway, that eastbound ramp then is moved, right? It's moved to this new Bushnell Park West. Ooh. And the eastbound on-ramp would be here. So that's a change in traffic patterns and even how a significant portion of traffic moves through the Trident series of intersections. So people coming from, say, the Hartford, rather than coming straight down and onto Broad, would now come down the hill and wrap around onto the ramp. So I just want to lay that out there so people have that in mind as we're going to go through some different scenarios for how those local roads could be configured. And generally speaking, we understand that it's not just a vehicular issue. Those intersections are rather inhospitable for bicyclists and pedestrians and even transit users. It's really tough to move through there. And we've heard a lot, I mentioned before that one of our options does discontinue Broad Street at these intersections. We've heard, a lot about the importance of that north-south connectivity, and, we understand the sensitivity there. And as we look at these various options that we've developed, we're using some of the traffic critical flaws that we've used on the various interchange options during our screening process to kind of be that first level test as to whether some of these ideas for the Trident work. And that, we wouldn't want ramps to queue back, the cars to be stacked back onto the freeway. That'd be a safety issue. And then we've identified, if an individual intersection has an average delay of 2 minutes, that basically means the average user would get to the intersection and wait a whole traffic signal cycle. We've established that as a metric for something that'd be fatally flawed. So like I said on the other stuff, we like to draw. We've tried a whole bunch of different options, and I'm going to end up going through about 4. But we kind of applied those critical criteria and sort of a gut check, and many of them were kind of taken off the table at that point. But some good ideas have certainly come of that, and some great ideas have come through our working sessions and our involvement with the public. So I just want to have you think as we go through the 4 options that are on the table about how we might measure them, because that is going to be the next step for us. We're going to take the feedback we get from you. We're going to be working over the winter to come towards some resolution on which of these concepts for the Trident we'll move forward with. So obviously we want to improve traffic operations and safety, mobility for all users. That's enshrined right there in our purpose and need. We also think the footprint of the intersection is important. Does play a little bit to the bicyclist and pedestrian mobility as well.
Which intersection?
This is for the Trident area, so like
Which intersection specifically does that refer to?
it's Farmington and Broad, Asylum and Cogswell, then the kind of the whole area. We're going to minimize property impacts. That's important for any public project. And then we're looking, it's right there in our goals and objectives for the purpose and needs statement to potentially look at opportunities for development. So there's 4 general options I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to blow up kind of each of them one by one. And we've organized them generally from least challenging to most challenging, and I'll point out some of those pros and cons as we go through. So this first one we call discontinuous Broad Street, and we really need to come up with some slick names, but really rolls off the tongue. So the idea here is, because of what I explained a little bit earlier about the shifting of the ramps, right? So with the eastbound on-ramp located here, a big demand to cross this intersection north to south is gone. That's not all demand is not gone, we understand that, but a big amount of it is gone. So we just tested. When we first looked at it, we weren't really sure how it would work. And ultimately, the traffic operations do perform very well. It also allows us to have some smaller roadways. So those are things that we think are important. We would still maintain bicyclist and pedestrian access across those intersections. So right now there's actually 2 areas on either side of Broad Street that are technically city parks. So there's the potential that could be expanded. Certainly there'd be a pathway through there for folks to cross from Farmington all the way across to Asylum. And then we also see the addition of Garden Street as a potential aid in mitigating the vehicular mobility. So that could be a way for folks coming from Capitol Avenue to come north and get to the Asylum Hill neighborhood without even having to go through that congested area in the Trident.
Casey, you want to just mention Sumner Street as well?
Yeah, so sorry, we've got this dashed line here, and that's something that our team is starting to look at as part of each of these options. It's Sumner Street today terminates at Asylum. The idea has been proposed by several different folks, the city, DOT, over the years, and it's something we're kind of looking at in tandem with these options to quantify how much does it help. It would have some property impacts. We're not exactly sure what that would entail. Certainly there's a parking lot it would go through. How that impacts the facility that uses that, we're not really sure yet. So that's something we're kind of studying with each of these. It has the potential with some of them to ease operations at some of the crucial intersections. So we're sort of in the process of working our way through that. Is there anything else on this discontinuous Broad before I move on to the next one?
Does it have any impact on fire and safety?
On fire and safety?
Yeah.
That's
When you disconnect streets.
Sure, no, that's a good question. We can look into that. I don't off the top of my head, know where the firehouse would be that would need to access through there. So that's something we can look into.
I believe the closest firehouse is farther to the west.
Farther to the west.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Pearl Street station goes by up Asylum. I'm not sure.
So if they are coming up Asylum, that would not actually impact their mobility. The only thing it would impact is if they were, say, coming from Capitol to the west of Broad. That would be a change.
And I think the important thing also to keep in mind is that with a change like this, we'd also be easing congestion at the intersection, which is also an impediment to fire and emergency response.
That's true. That's a good point. Particular during the peak periods. So with that, I'll move on to our second option that I want to go through today, and that's called the Western Shift, and it does exactly what it's named. It moves the intersection of Asylum and Farmington about a block further to the west. And what that allows us to do is simplify the intersection of Asylum with Broad into just a simple four-way traffic signal. So what does that mean? It means it pushes a lot of traffic through this one intersection, particularly in an east-west direction, and it would result in some wider roadways. It's likely that this segment would be about 6 lanes wide total, so either three in each direction or perhaps 4 in one direction, for a total of either 6 or 7. So that's a wide roadway, so we want to be cognizant of that. But it would allow that Broad Street to remain through street as it is today. Asylum Place would likely be closed, but the movement it serves would be replicated at this intersection right here. The potential for Sumner Street could help this particular option more than some of the others, in that it would simplify some of the traffic movements, people coming down and across. And sort of the final impact we want to point out is that it would, certainly in plan view, so when we look top down, Nick, I don't know if you can highlight, he's got it right there. This is the DAS garage. So this garage is actually subterranean. You're looking at the top level, basically. It goes around and down into a ramp right there, and it's got about 530 parking spaces. Many of them are below grade. So we have our structural engineers looking to see whether those subterranean spaces could be maintained. That's to say the roadway would be constructed on top of the garage. If we can provide access down below, could we retain some of those parking spaces? So that's something we've just started to look at and are going to be working through in the next several weeks. Is there anything on the Western Shift?
Just curious about the intersection. It feels like you're just moving the same problem further to the west, only in that we're dealing with acute angles of merging traffic.
So that would be a signalized intersection. So it would be controlled by a traffic signal. And actually, I think, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, that would actually operate better from a delay perspective than this intersection?
Yeah, the trick is, right now you have a very, very short storage link between Asylum and Farmington on Broad Street. That's really the crux of the problem. So it doesn't,
it doesn't solve all the problems. It does move that heavy traffic movement to the west, but it also helps get rid of that really short storage space.
So there could potentially be some traffic queuing along this segment here. It's nothing we've identified as a fatal flaw, but it's certainly something we point out, particularly during those peak periods.
Other questions?
So through our coordination with the city and some of the other stakeholders, we've identified a opportunity to potentially extend Farmington Avenue. So that would take Farmington Avenue, and rather than have it kind of merge in with Asylum, would bring it all the way down the hill and have it dead end right at that Bushnell Park West, that Road A. So this kind of came up as an idea to improve east-west connectivity. It would add a second east-west road across I84. However, when we started to look at it, we did note that it would require us to shift the on and off ramps to the south to make room for this extra intersection. And when we do that, it actually makes this off ramp shorter. And that became a potential problem when we talk about those fatal flaws associated with ramp queuing. And we're actually in the process of working with the city's consultant team to do a third-party review of the traffic model just to make sure we understand those traffic volumes coming off that ramp. And we're going to be continuing to work to confirm that over the next several weeks and months. And I don't know, Tom, is there anything you wanted to add on that particular option?
Just that, you know, the goal with Farmington Avenue is an important one just to think about, which is that what you're really trying to do is enhance connectivity in that what we kind of call that south quadrant. And Farmington Avenue Extension is one way to think about that. And I think that, you know, as we look at what to do in that area, I think our overarching desire there is to create connectivity and to be able to activate the spaces, whether it's open space or development or some combination of those. And that was the genesis of the Farmington Avenue extension. And so obviously the ramping system is very, very constrained in that area. And so I think we have a lot of ways in which to work around that as we look at the model and see what it is that we can do in terms of exactly where to locate the ramps or slightly move the ramps and whether or not this can fit.
And I think you're going to talk to some of that kind of in the next module of the presentation.
What does that do to the capping in that area? If Farmington's going right through the middle of it?
It's a good question. So,
Just repeat the question. So that
yeah, the question was, what does that do to the capping? And I think it wouldn't change much. Structurally, there'd be a change. There'd be the structure to carry the roadway would be a little different than to carry open space. But I think the feasibility of capping between Broad and that Farmington extension and that Farmington extension and Asylum would still be there.
It would go right over the road?
It would be like the sidewalk of the road extended. Nick, can you pull? Yeah, it would be sort of like how Broad is connected to Asylum in that proposed cap. There'd just be a road through the middle of it. So Farmington would be at the same grade as the cap.
What would happen if instead of having to move the ramp so you could get the Farmington extension in there, what if you left them where they are and had the Farmington extension take a sharper turn south and have it end up closer to Road B? What would that do?
You know, we did look at that, and the one thing we noticed with that is it meant that a lot of that traffic that takes Farmington and is destined for the CBD, a lot of them were then routing through Asylum Place. They were coming in like this and coming up at Asylum Place and down Asylum, because that Farmington extension was now so far to the south. And we were finding a kind of fatal flaw with that at the Asylum Place intersection. It was really just pushing too much traffic through there. But as we continue to review the traffic models, we'll make sure those conclusions are still consistent.
There's some sort of one-way operation now on Asylum Street around the hospital. Does that continue to be a one-way and then shift in the morning and afternoon?
I don't think that's in place anymore. I think
I don't even know.
I think that's a good question. No, there definitely used to be a period reversal where in certain times of the day it was one way certain directions. I think that's been removed. I think it's now two-way all the time.
Okay. The other question is, I'm thinking 53-foot trailers, full sleeper cab trucks, trying to make some of these tortuous turns around this reconfigured highway, and have you contemplated the difficulties that are presented?
Absolutely, and even you're probably thinking of that option I showed a little while ago that had an S-curve in there, and that's one of the reasons why we don't view that favorably, because of that horizontal geometry, which could be a tracking issue. So yeah, we're definitely mindful of our horizontal curvature, how large vehicles would interact, especially on these multi-lane roadways where tracking for large vehicles would be an issue. So yeah, we are keeping that in mind. Last one, the fun one.
Oh, roundabout.
So, yeah, we've heard a lot of questions over the last several months, years, about the idea of putting a roundabout at the Trident, and I think it's been studied by several. So obviously, we're looking at it a little bit more in the context of the revisions to the ramp network, which makes it a little bit different from how it would function today. But, you know, roundabouts can be great gateways, can be traffic calming measures into neighborhoods. So, you know, we totally understand where the idea comes from. So what we were thinking is we looked at testing, you know, a single lane roundabout. That's your standard, traditional. You're seeing them built in some places around the state. And unfortunately, the traffic volumes are almost double the amount of vehicles per hour what we see that a single lane roundabout could take. And so when we tested what kind of congestion that would have, it was pretty bad. It would essentially back up these approaching streets all the way back to Sumner and back, Farmington as well. So what we did is we started adding lanes, and I should say Nick started adding lanes, and until we got to a point where we thought the operations would be acceptable and the queues would be acceptable. And so I call it the Kraken. So it's ultimately we think that this, you know, as confusing as it looks from the top down, you can probably imagine as a driver what it would be like to try and, you'd have to be in the right lane, otherwise you'd miss your lane and you'd be Clark Griswold in European Vacation going around and around. And trying to cross these legs as a pedestrian would be difficult. They may even need to be signalized, which would kind of defeat a lot of the purpose that roundabouts offer with kind of free flow traffic. So, you know, our recommendation at this point is that we do move forward without the roundabout, but that we will continue to look at roundabouts at intersections in the project area where they're appropriate, you know, where they serve less traffic and they could be good gateways into some of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the highway and the major arterials. So what are we doing now? So we're going to take the slide before I started all this, where we talked about some of our goals and objectives. We're going to look at those and really quantify how each of these options that are on the table rank. And I think what we expect to do is to take some of the feedback that we got at the late October working session that we're getting from you today and build that into our assessments and come back to you and the public early next year with some recommendations about where we think we're going to head with these roadway network options here in this area. So obviously that is impacts to traffic, quantifying those impacts, looking at in a little bit more detail at how bicyclists and pedestrians would interact at these intersections, and then how they work with the station planning concepts that Gina and Tom are going to get into very shortly. And I did mention the third-party review of the traffic demand model just to make sure we're all on the same page with that. I think there's some discussion, Mike. I don't know if you want to moderate.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I think what you can see from this presentation, which was really nicely done, is that this is all about trade-offs. It's really hard to solve every problem that the Trident represents. So what we're trying to do is find a balance. And what's the solution? We don't want it to be a total traffic solution. You know, it's got to fit within the context of the neighborhood. It's got to be able to accommodate all users equally well and all of that. So I think the ideas that you've seen laid out here, you know, might not be the panacea that, you know, we all hope for, but I think some of these do a lot of those things fairly well. None of them do them perfectly. And I think we have to really decide, you know, which direction do we want to go? Do we want to tolerate a little bit of congestion so that we can have better, safer streets? Do we want this thing just to move a lot of traffic? I don't think that that's what the city has in mind, but we also want to make sure that we don't impact the highway ramp configurations that have been already worked out as well. So, you know, like that initial graphic said, some have least amount of challenges, some have very high amount of challenges, like the roundabout. But which of these do you favor? Is there anything here that you think makes the most sense? I'm shocked that Tony's the first one.
Well, you won't be when I tell you that no, none of them satisfy me. I am amazed that you haven't dealt with the fundamental problem here, which is two huge streams of traffic coming together in one place. That isn't necessary. And it seems to me that sending Farmington Avenue off in some manner with an extension is one way to divide the traffic that wants to go straight down Asylum to the CBD from that which wants to go to the capital area. And you can choose, like back in my neighborhood in the West End, If I want to go to the Capitol area, I will get on Farmington or Capitol. If I want to go downtown, I might get on Asylum. You can make those choices way back out of this area. And so you can probably avoid these huge streams of cars converging, which is where your mess comes. So that's one comment. And the second comment is, none of this makes a lot of sense without knowing where the station is going to be. I mean, you said you had to do these two things together, but none of this shows that you've done that. And it seems to me we got to start looking at the station maybe first and make some decisions about it and where it goes, and then make the streets work around it rather than the other way around, just what this seems to be.
Thank you, Tony.
Sure.
Any response from the team on that?
And then, there we go. Is it working yet?
Yeah.
No, yeah, okay, it just takes a while to turn on. All right, so I agree with what you're saying about splitting traffic movements up. It is an awful lot of traffic going to downtown, and today they are really constrained into taking Asylum. It's the best way, it's the fastest way for most of that traffic coming from the west. You're right about the farther west you go, the more options you have, picking Asylum versus Farmington. And we are looking at the Farmington extension, moving it south. You provided an idea which was basically teeing it into Road B so it goes straight down to Capitol and provide better access down there. So that's something I want to check out. Sumner Street might help with that. And you're right, it's really, the key is the connectivity west of that area, making sure that cars have the opportunity to get between Farmington and Asylum. So I don't have any firm answers to give you yet, but it is something we're looking at, especially based on what you've offered.
Yeah, and Tony, I think, the great thing about this iterative approach with the city's consultant on board is, they're taking a look at the traffic numbers and the models to see if what our findings were on the i84 project team are consistent with what their findings are. So that process, that peer review is happening. As to the second part of your question, the station integration, that's what we're going to move into now, and I think Tom and Bill from the consultant city side is going to talk a little bit about that and which one of these things makes more sense depending on whether the station's north or south of Asylum. So it's hard to talk about these things all together. I know that that's the ideal way, but we wanted to sort of get your opinion on the Trident solution first, and then we're about halfway through the meeting, so this is about the right time to transition to the station discussion, but I don't want to leave this topic until we've heard from anyone who wants to make a comment.
Just want to make one observation. If you're going to be dividing Broad Street, I'm looking at it for troopers that are trying to flip directions, as we put it. If we're coming westbound out of the tunnel area, we need to be able to get back eastbound in the tunnel area because you just drove by the crashes on the eastbound side without having to go halfway to West Hartford. So if you're going to split that, you're not going to be able to go straight down Broad Street. Make sure that Garden Street crossing is there.
Sure.
You can't eliminate both, otherwise it's going to take us twice as long to try to flip back around to get to another direction.
And because the eastbound on-ramp is now flipped over to this Bushnell Park
Yes.
West, you actually wouldn't need to go straight across Broad. You would probably be coming down Codswell and down Asylum anyway to hop on this ramp.
Potentially, depending on the time of day and the traffic volume that's going to be coming through, you got to make sure we've got a couple of options. I'm saying,
Gotcha.
whichever, if you're going to divide Broad Street, just make sure there's a second way
Redundancy.
to
Gotcha.
do that flip. Yeah.
Sure.
Just a question, Casey, could that bike ped connection be something that has like removable bollards that emergency vehicles could get through if need be?
We're talking need it now. Not get out of the car, pull the bollards out, and then go. It's got to be just a standard roadway to get through.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with how high-tech that technology is. It's not.
It's not.
It's not.
Any other thoughts? I'll go to Jackie then. I'll get you, Joyce.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. It seems like extending Farmington Avenue has some attraction. Number one, in the winter, you're not dealing with that steep grade going up Asylum Street. And just for 44 apartments and art space, we might be able to exit on Farmington Avenue versus Extension versus Asylum, which is death-defying some days trying to take a left turn out of there. Believe it or not, it's easier to go around the park than to take a left-hand turn. So those are my just two thoughts on that.
I just want to throw out there, and I didn't mention it at all when we talked about it, but the Farmington extension would not be flat. It has to go kind of down the same hill that all the other roads go down, so it'd be a little flatter, probably more in like the 5% range, whereas Asylum's 7%. So a little flatter, but it still would be a relatively significant grade. It's kind of right at the high end of kind of pedestrian mobility.
So my question was about the extension as well. From my perspective, it seems like of the choices presented, a great idea in terms of alleviating traffic flow, regularizing intersections, which to me seems a lot safer and handier from a pedestrian perspective as well as a vehicular flow traffic perspective. I was curious about the comment about when you were talking about the ramp and whether it being a little too short, and it just brought up the question in my mind of, you know, the hierarchy of needs, and is it really about over accommodating the interstate as opposed to the local roads, was just one question that came to mind. And two, now that you have a little bit more regularized roads as well as parcels, does that mean that there's a little bit more opportunity for development, or I'm not quite sure what's happening between Asylum and Farmington to the east, or in between the interstate and Broad Street as well? Just that whole new level of space.
So about the ramp, I guess we would just say that the concern we're looking at is that the ramp, particularly during the morning peak hour when a lot of people are coming off the highway, would back up onto the freeway. That is what we feel would be a fatal flaw. So I hear your question about the hierarchy, and you know, it would be probably dishonest to say there's not some hierarchy, and I think we are trying to make sure we're cognizant of all the different modes and different roadway systems. But I would say too, because you had mentioned the attractiveness of this concept from a bike ped standpoint, because we're keeping this section here all open and connected, those roadways are going to need to be pretty wide to let the traffic go through and to let them queue between these two intersections. So you're looking at a segment of Broad Street here that might be 8 lanes wide.
So maybe that's a little misleading with all the options, is that there isn't a true sense of traffic rates.
Yeah, that's our constant struggle is how much detail to throw at you guys, and so we do have some maps that we could show you, and I think we envision another standalone public working session that would present a lot more detail. It's tough to tell with the thin blue line.
And I think with regard to the development question, we're going to get to that in this next session. We have some good graphics on that. Great question. But I think, you know, when we say there's a hierarchy with regard to traffic, it's not just traffic, it's safety. And I think, you know, if you've ever encountered a spillback from a ramp while you're trying to decelerate from 60, yeah, it's pretty significant. So. Okay, I'm sorry, we're going to be able to answer more questions after the meeting with a model if you want to hang out, but I definitely want to get into the station concepts now. I'm going to introduce Gina again. You know, last June when we all met, we started to focus on this for the first time. And, you know, again, Trans-Systems and Gina and Jim and their group are working on sort of the programmatic needs of all of these stations. And you know, where that'll be, you know, can fit best. We're working a lot now thinking about the whole integration with the urban design, right? And that's what the city's consultant has been brought on to help do. So it's been a lot of back and forth of understanding how do the bus bays work in concert with, you know, the station and where the rail passengers go. So, and then what happens with the development, getting to your question, around the station. It's really important. And then ultimately, Tony, how do the roads work to serve all that? So, you know, it's really trying to look at all of these things in concert. And we also need to understand that we're thinking very carefully about how to phase this. Gina will talk a little bit more about that in her slides, but you know, we have to think about the construction, moving the railroad so that remains working while the highway is being reconstructed, and then building the station, and you know, trying to avoid as much temporary work as possible so we don't have to replace things down the road. So Gina's going to walk you through about 5 concepts that really focus on whether that station's north or south of Asylum and what that means for, you know, the integration of bus and rail and other modes. And then we'll have Tom and Bill come up and talk a little bit more about some thinking about how the design and development opportunities around those stations might work.
Okay. So for those of you who were at the October work group meeting, these are repeat slides. For those of you who were back at the June PAC meeting, we've simplified the slides and reduced a few of them to simplify different options within kind of the same concept. So what I'm going to present today really are 3 options for the north side of Asylum and 2 on the south. And what we're trying to focus here on is, as Mike said, where should the station really be located? Should it be located on the north side or on the south side? And once, and as part of that decision, how should the bus facilities and the rail station be laid out together? For those who are new to the project, or for those who need to be reminded, the tracks are going to be moved about 1,000 feet west of where they currently serve Union Station, causing the need for a new rail station. Hand in hand with that rail station, we're considering where the bus facilities should go. And so this would be the Intercity Bus, Peter Pan, and Greyhound, as well as CT Transit, the local buses. We've heard through the public as well as through different workshops we've had with Transit Technical Committee and the PAC that a multimodal facility seems to be the way to go. So integrating both the bus and the rail facilities together so that the passengers on both those types of modes are really meeting together in the same type of a station facility, or at least proximate, so that they can do transferring between the different modes pretty succinctly and conveniently. The first station concept that I'm showing on the north side of Asylum, we're calling Asylum Plaza. So this would be a station facility. At the pink, okay, so this is a bird's eye view, and this is at the street level. The station itself would have to be different levels, because once the highway is lowered and the tracks are lowered, that would be below street grade. You would have to enter the station facility at the street off of Asylum in some areas here. And then you would go down to the track level and the platform level below. So just picture this as a bird's eye view at the street level. The purple box is representing the rail station. The tracks are at this location. Just to orient you, this is Cogswell, this is Asylum, this is Spruce, the current Union Station, and this is the new Garden Street extension. So for this concept layout, we would locate the train station just north of Asylum. There could be an entry-level plaza in front of the train station as a pedestrian, plaza and welcome area. We would have the bus facilities located either directly north on top of the depressed highway or to the northwest, and with some type of a connection either across Garden Street or below grade. You could have a mezzanine level where you would be connecting your bus and your rail facilities. This would rely on a cap on the north side of Asylum because, again, the highway would be lowered and the tracks would be lowered, and you would have the facility over the depressed highway. So this would also have to be a phased construction because the tracks would be relocated first, and then a few years later the highway would be relocated. So you would have to build the facility, a temporary facility, and then expand it over the lowered highway. The second north of Asylum concept we're calling the Garden Street access because we're envisioning that the bus and the vehicles would be accessing off of Garden Street. Here we've moved the rail and the bus facilities a little bit closer so that connection is easier to make. This also relies on an overbuild, a phased construction, although the west part of this facility could be built first and then expanded once the lowered highway is built. So we're envisioning the station a little bit closer to Asylum and the bus facility directly behind it, where you would again have a common station facility. So we've also been thinking about the potential for any safety or security issues with building over a highway, building a rail station or a multimodal station over a highway. We're in conversations with the Department of Homeland Security, FHWA, FRA, and so on to really understand if there are going to be any potential impacts in building a facility over a highway. If there are, then we need to have a better layout that minimizes that security or respects that security and safety concern. In this case, we're showing a facility which is really a split facility where you would have your rail station not built over the tracks or over the highway, so to the west of the new tracks. And then you would have your bus facility up in this area, which is on solid ground. Although this would be probably cheaper to build as well as minimize the potential for safety and security concerns, there is not that multimodal connectivity that we keep hearing about. And so if you want to transfer between local bus, intercity bus, and rail station, you would need to walk about 1,000 plus feet to get over to the rail facility. But it's an option that we are considering also as a no overbuild option. Now, when we look on the south side of Asylum, this was suggested by members of the public that instead of just looking on the north, let's look on the south. And so this is one concept we're calling the Capitol View Transitway, because it was suggested that there would be a nice vision or vista between Bushnell Park and the Hartford Insurance Company, so the Capitol View corridor, where you would have your rail facility, and this can be reconfigured. This is a little bit of an odd shape, but you could reconfigure the rail facility so it could be built just strictly over the track area, and then your buses and your drop-off area, kiss and ride drop-off area could be built kind of on a diagonal so that you do leave a vision corridor in this area. There is a significant overbuild also over the highway, and it is a phased construction. Another option on the south, we're calling the Broad Street Station. The rail facility would be really off of Farmington Avenue if this Farmington Avenue layout remains. The bus facility is over the highway, but in a north-south longitudinal manner. You would have access on and off of Broad Street. And this, again, would be your rail station, which could be constructed as soon as the tracks are in place. So that could be built as part of the phase one. Now, I really would like to call the city consultants up, because what they're going to do now is they've refined the concepts to integrate them with potential economic development, TOD development, as well as local street networks, so that you can see what it could be envisioned in the future.
Yeah, so just to recap, I mean, Gina just showed you 5 options, 3 to the north, 2 to the south. Again, just like the Trident, it's all about trade-offs, and I think this is where the city's consultants have given a lot of thought to, which one of these maximize sort of the city benefit. So I guess, Tom, you're going to start off.
Great, thanks. And again, we're trying to build off of these station siting strategies and think about how they fit into the larger context of the neighborhood. Again, some of the important goals are, enhancing and improving connectivity, really trying to create a strong sense of place. It's a large area that with potentially a lot of vacant space or open space. We want to build it out. We want the Asylum Hill neighborhood and the downtown to feel as one big connected zone. And so we want to make sure that we create that strong sense of place. And as part of that, really understand economic development potential and make sure that we're doing things that can enhance and create that development potential in the places where it really makes sense to happen. But we have to think about how to do that in the context of, the cost of this project, and obviously we have to be cognizant of trying to make this a feasible project. We want it built. And the costs of capping are very expensive, so you have to think about, well, what's the best way to do that and try to minimize capping at the same time.
we potentially have a lot of open space that will be created, especially in the areas where we're capping. And it's great to have open space, but you have to think about who manages it and how it gets managed and how it really gets integrated and is used and becomes part of the community, becomes part of the city, and really becomes an opportunity for creating development and creating great quality of space. So we have to think about how that open space really works in concert with the transit facilities and development. And then Gina had said this also, and it's really important, the integration of the transit uses, the transit elements. I think our goal here is to really make it feel like a transit hub, and whether that is an extended transit hub where they're all connected pieces but easy to access, or whether they're almost more built in, connected to each other. This is a transit district, and we want it to feel like a transit district. It's a transit-oriented place. So the transit hub, the elements have to really kind of be accentuated in that way. And so what we did was and Tony, you actually kind of, said, well, let's think about the station and where it goes, and then how can this network possibly work with that, both open space and streets and all. And so we took the north station designs and the south station designs and began to think about them with some of the caveats that we talked about, keeping the train facility off the highway, but placing it really in either of these two locations, north and south, given the network that we have, and what can we kind of achieve in terms of all of those goals that we set. And so here are some of the exercises that we created. And, I think the important thing, I'll turn it over to Bill to kind of talk through these, but the idea here is to find that right mix of conditions that create great quality space, create open space, but also our projects that and ways to develop this that we think can be really feasible. So Bill, do you want to walk through the first couple?
So for the north of Asylum option, we started where Gina did, with trying to get the bus station as close to the rail station as possible, and causing us to build or at least locate the bus station over the highway footprint. We also turned the station footprint to allow for more development to happen at the Cogswell and Asylum intersection. So again, trying to get that bookending of development on either side, on the station side of Asylum. In this scheme, we're looking at bending a road that connects from Broad Street down to Capitol to create more access within the block itself. It will also help give more frontage to some of the development that could occur along the south side. We're also bending Road B into Road A to help open up the southern blocks of the site, because these buildings are quite big and low and sit low. We're trying to create more of a street condition that has more experience related to the park in terms of the geometry that we've created in this scheme.
Excuse me one second. Would it be easier if Bill pointed to this? Most of the group is on this side of the room. Would that be a better screen to look at?
You can use the pointer that's on the...
I'll be your pointer.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do it. So, and it's a really good point. I think the relationship, even if the station's to the north, one of the things we have to think about is, well, there's a large space to the south that's primarily on cap. And how do you use that space? And so the idea of instituting that road was really designed around thinking about making sure that that south area is populated and becomes an activated space, because it's a very large area. That zone is several acres.
And we have a couple ideas about how to use that space with either, maybe there's some recreational fields that get included in that. This gap itself is almost 200 feet wide. That's 2/3 of the distance of a football field. We're thinking if you can get some development on a piece that's off the rail station to the east, is there another lower scale light frame structure that could have food and beverage or some other ground floor amenity would sit over the rail station portion of that area. And this scheme, because of the way we've positioned the buses over the highway, has the most cap area of the other schemes that we're going to show today, but it also has the most development area, because we're not impacting the orange blocks that we're creating for where mixed-use development could occur. So the variation we've looked at, as Gina had previously mentioned, is moving the bus to the east of the highway. Again, it impacts the development footprint that we'd be able to get right across from the existing Union Station and the kind of reuse and repurposing of that plaza area where the bus is parked today. But it does reduce the cap area.
And there's a lot of examples of the construction of integrated multimodal facilities where the pieces are extended along a corridor. But the challenge there is obviously making people feel as if it's really all one kind of connected district. And so if we are looking at an off-cap strategy along Garden, I think, you know, Garden becomes a very important street for people to be able to utilize and feel that they can move easily between the different facilities, the existing Union Station, the bus, the parking, and the rail and the open space in there. And so that's going to be a very important consideration if this turns out to be one that people feel strongly is really the direction we want to go. And
Is there data that you're using supporting the importance of having a bus station very near a train station as far as having them connected?
So I think we recognize the importance of, in general, the downtown area being a very well serviced place by multiple modes of transit. I think what you're asking is, do we understand how many people are coming in on bus and switching to the rail? And I don't think we have that data. It's both over the road long haul buses and local transit buses, and the transfer between those two different types of services is different as well. I think we feel strongly that connecting the local bus and rail is going to be a very important element to creating the type of behavior so that people feel that if they don't have a car and they need to get to the train, that's a connection we want to make sure is strong, even if currently there isn't a lot of transfers. And there won't be a lot of transfers today because there's infrequent train service. But when we shift from 4 a day to 17 a day, we do feel the train is going to become a much more popular use, and that connection, I think, is a strong one and an important one. I think what we need to be thinking about is the size and scale of that bus facility. How large of an element is it? How do you look at the different types of buses that are using it and whether they should be together and how they kind of are situated? At the moment, we're kind of showing these as big blocks, and I think when you get down to the scale we want to get to in the next phase, that's not going to look quite as imposing as it does now. But you bring up a good point. Is there a strong need to have them tied together, or do we have an opportunity to kind of put these uses around the district and then create a transit hub where there's a lot of just distinct transit uses happening in the district that are all kind of interrelated?
If I could, it's on. In our discussions with Amtrak and Greyhound, they both said that it increases their ridership and it's important to have that symbiotic relationship. However, we don't have exact numbers from them. We can see if we can get those, if they have data from other locations where they have that connectivity, and if they have specific ridership increases that happened.
I want to answer one. And just really quickly, it's really important to have the station energized by as many passengers and riders as you can. That you need to have that high level of use at a station, and the more modes that you would introduce to that, obviously the higher number of people you would have, and accessing any of the retail options in that station. Plus, we've really heard loud and clearly from multitude of people that it's very important to have all the modes connected. So that's the direction.
Is he coming over here, Aaron? I'll just jump in from a, I guess, practical or real life standpoint. There are many people in my neighborhood that don't have access to a car and that are planning on utilizing this new rail service as a way to have access to New Haven and Springfield as additional job markets. And having the connection of the bus and the train right next to each other will make that commute much easier. Not only does it encourage use, but it also reduces the total transit time. So to have a bus station and then on top of that throw a 10-minute walk to get to a train station is pretty unpractical for people when they're trying to get to a job. Any other thoughts?
Just a question. You haven't shown any topographical information, and I'm wondering where the high point is, which is where I would want to put the station. Is it at the corner of Broad and Asylum? Is it on one side or the other side? I mean, where would you put an iconic architectural statement?
It's about right here. At Broad and Asylum.
I think it would be helpful if you showed a map with topographic lines.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of topography here. The walk in 2 dimensions that we showed on this last slide, you know, you need to also recognize that that's a 3-dimensional walk. You're coming from a lower point to a higher point there. And so we do have to think about that seasonally. We have to think about it from the perspective of, you know, users and all that. And Tony, your point is more about where's the best place to place the transit center, but there's also the connectivity piece of that. And so we do have to consistently talk about the fact that it's in 3 dimensions. We've cut a lot of sections. People don't read sections very well often. So I think we'll have to do a best job we can to really illustrate these points of connection as we get down into that next scale. Again, our goal, if you kind of go back to this drawing, is to set that station at the top of the hill, at that point of highest topography, where you can access the station directly. We see that as, you know, there are always factors and elements, but there are certain things that really are overarching. And you know, that station should sit in the right place. We feel that strongly there's a strong connection to Asylum, and that it should be set on the tracks. The north is obviously more centered on the tracks, but the north and south both are over the track, and that's where I think you can really pivot other strategies off of an idea that central station is kind of either just on the north or south side of Asylum, right where the tracks are. And that's kind of why that's what this exercise was all about, trying to figure out, all right, well, how can you fit those pieces together? And again, on the south side, you know, like the north side, there's some opportunities. And so why don't we walk through some of our thoughts on the south side. Again, in the south, with this idea of curving, I'm sorry, I'll point this out, with the idea of curving Bushnell Park, one of the reasons we wanted to do that is because of the incredible space that you have on the other side, and you want to really activate and extend the open space of Bushnell Park into and through this district. That's one of the strongest ways to tie the Asylum Hill into the downtown, and that's something we're really trying to work with. And given where the ramps are, one of the things we're really trying to figure out is, you know, as you begin to lay out this whole south quadrant, where is the best way that you might be able to kind of connect open space, create development, and also fit the transit facilities. And so we have a couple options here that we wanted to show you. This is the first. It's really playing off of what Gina showed you previously. And the thing about this one is it does kind of change the nature of the road system through here, but I'll let you kind of talk through it.
Wait, just one real quick question for the team, though. Getting back to Tony's comment just about the visibility and the high points and topography, is it possible to drop a station model into our 3D model, just so we can visualize it from different points?
That would be very helpful.
Might be a good thing for the next time, yeah.
And one of the interesting facts about the South Station, the South Asylum Station configurations, is paired with the kind of western move of that Trident condition. If you stayed with the Asylum alignment into downtown and get rid of Farmington, it allows you more footprint for the train station to be nosed out into the view corridor from downtown on Asylum to the west, as well as the Asylum and Farmington corridors coming, looking down towards the east at the high point. So it really becomes a focal point and an opportunity to create a really iconic station, a very visible station at that point, which is architecturally something interesting that we could achieve with that particular siting. Other aspects of this, you know, obviously trying to move the bus station to be proximate to the train station. In this case, bringing in a street that would connect both to the train station as well as to the development on the southern side, and allowing access into some of the deeper blocks that we're creating, fronting towards the southern part of the block.
And I think one thing we recognize is that it'll be very challenging. We want to obviously encourage development in this area. There is going to be open space that especially open space, you know, on terra firma
that can be well positioned for development. But the economics of building development on a cap are pretty challenging, and so that if we are capping, we're likely capping as open space or transit use in a lot of regards. And so one of the things we have to think about is, if we have this space and we want to minimize the cap, how do you balance those different elements? And we're a little concerned in this alignment about whether we are, activating this development space and how this works. So we've continued to try to come up with strategies for integrating a road into that area. And I just want to kind of flip ahead to our second scheme. Well, let me actually, Bill, maybe we'll stay the course. Why don't you talk through the open space ideas? Again, you've seen kind of how the cap is extended here. Well, that in some respects breaks the open space and kind of creates a separation. And so one of the things we've been thinking about is how we might be able to, in some ways still extend the green space so that there's a feeling of connection between Bushnell Park and the developments and the space on the other side.
So one thing that we've constantly been thinking about, if the ramps have to end up in the southern block, wherever they end up landing, this is the configuration we're talking about now, how do we begin to mitigate that impact on the interior of the court, the connection to the park, because it's movement, this diagonal movement that we've been talking about for a couple months now, we think is an important thing to try to maintain in the project from Asylum Hill down into the park. How can we mitigate how that really kind of tunnel entrance down in through the cap gets dealt with? And in this case, we're talking about, because the site is higher this way and the roads kind of drop down, maybe there's a way to kind of bend the open space so that we can sit a deck on top of that ramp. And that facing on Bushnell Park West, you would have this upper level open space that would then transition down into this open space we're creating within the development, so that it mitigates as much of that kind of tunnel experience and that kind of slice into the gap, into the cap that we're creating. So it's just a way of trying to deal with the conditions so that you would have more of a traditional kind of tunnel mouth at the street, but the open space would try to mitigate the experience from inside the court.
Is that clear to everybody? Sort of. I know it's very difficult to, go from plan view to these cut sections and, all right.
Well, the gist of it is that the goal here is to extend an open space connection from Bushnell Park through this zone, whether it's just visual with maybe some crosswalks and whatnot, or whether it's really a direct connection. We're beginning to try to understand, both in vertical and horizontal ways, how we can really make a strong connection to Bushnell Park itself. And that's going to really set up both development opportunity, but also great, the quality of this space in here. And so, because I know we've obviously gone over our time, I'll switch to the kind of the second idea, and that was as opposed to kind of, we've been thinking about getting a road through this area, Farmington Avenue extended. Maybe what we really need is a road through the area, but maybe we can do it in a slightly different way. We need access. Could we do a radial road design where we really kind of create a development zone between Road A and this kind of second road? The second road would sit a little higher up vertically from Road A, but you would really kind of create what would be this kind of development zone in here. And then that leaves you with the cap space as kind of this one big site. Sorry, I'm talking in and out of the microphone. And what's interesting about that is that could afford us an opportunity to maybe have an integrated development at this site, kind of a joint development where you could have development, private development, integrated in with transit and bus and parking, and really kind of create one of those signature downtown hubs. This site, at about 4.5 acres, begins to lend itself to that type of opportunity. So I know we're running short on time. So here's an example, for example, in Boulder, Boulder Junction, which was just built, which has bus and rail connections. There's about 350 parking spaces, a hotel, residential apartments, and some retail associated with a footprint pretty similar in size to the footprint we just showed you. And I think this gives us some sort of thoughts about,
you know, this can be this great signature space, but maybe it's a space that can even integrate development in this same area. And if you have development at that pinnacle point, that can also set up the opportunity for creating the extended open space and the development to the south. I'll let Bill talk about a couple of other examples.
Sure. Another example is the Anaheim Regional Transportation Intermodal Center. This train station has been built, its existence today, but as California builds out the high-speed rail system, the idea is that over time, that influence of new transit modes being able to intersect here will begin to trigger the development that can occur around that train station and allow for mixed-use development and new streets to come in and integrated with the open spaces that we've been talking about are really important to create a civic kind of experience around the train station. But this is both train and bus operations occurring in the same location today. And these earlier concepts actually did look at more vertical solutions for how to stack train on top of bus configuration.
Yeah, I think one thing we're thinking about here is that if there is a signature design space that also incorporates development, that it sets up other development potential for all the other sites in the area. And, you know, this is, you know, a very big and bold and very urban example, but Transbay is the type of facility that had, you know, kind of stacked, integrated mass transit. I think that it fits in within the context of the community. It's a signature space, but it's also a development site. And so we've been, I think, searching for a space that's large enough to begin to think about doing that. That is also the space that we've kind of considered as the space to be capped, so it's also very challenging. Perhaps the goal here then should be, all right, if we have to cap this area because that's what really is needed, maybe we can take advantage of that, take advantage of its height and its prominence in the area and turn it into kind of the signature site that sort of sets up the neighborhood.
This is strictly my opinion. This is strictly my vision. I believe that the station must be at a high point and it must address the park. So if you put it on the north side of Asylum, it doesn't directly address the park. It doesn't really complement the Memorial Arch, the Capitol Building, and other structures in the park. Secondly, I'm not sure I understand why you need to extend the green space of the park into that triangular area. I think it would be fine to have development that fronts on the park as long as it's not too high, as long as it doesn't obscure the view of the station, which should be the dominating structure. And I think I had one other question. Oh yeah, one other comment. The city historically tends to desperately grasp at every square foot of developable space. Don't do that. Make the very first priority be the location and design and the sense of place and the surroundings of the station itself. Then fit the development parcels in around it. And you'd have the whole north side of Asylum available if you put it there. And like I was saying, you can have lower height development in front of the station as long as it's not obscuring the view of the station.
So Tony, you're saying you like the south location, don't necessarily think of it as a development site as well as a station, focus on creating a great station.
Exactly.
But also have the visual connection that you really want to have to Bushnell Park.
Right.
Okay.
But I don't see why you can't have development in that same triangle as long as it complements the station.
And there's so many different ways of thinking about integrated development.
Right.
It doesn't have to be all stacked together, but the idea is that you might be able to, because of the public investment done there, you could have a shared joint development opportunity at that site, which would really be a big win.
I mean, you're talking about a 100-year building, at least. I mean, maybe more, like the present station. I know the highway is also supposed to be a 100-year highway, but you can't see it there. And the point is, in terms of some long-term psychic civic objective, the station is the single most important thing that needs to be gotten right.
I think we've got about 5 minutes, and we have to
let you go. I mean, we are going to be here afterwards. If there are more detailed questions about these ideas, we'll stick around. But we do have a couple other things on the agenda we just want to wrap up. Do you guys have any more slides you need to get through? Okay. Rich, you want to say a few words about the interchange?
Yeah, I'll wrap up. This is not as fun as the last half-hour discussion. Just to give you an update on the interchange study, we're getting close to a place where we can kind of announce some of our preliminary analysis. And we had plans to have a public forum this fall. I think we actually had announced that. We're not quite ready, and we had always wanted to combine a public forum to discuss the viaduct project and the multimodal station planning effort. So I'm inclined to postpone to 2018, early 2018, where we can have some public forums in East Hartford and in Hartford, cover the multimodal station effort and the interchange study. So I just wanted to announce that. So stay tuned, but I think it will probably be January or February before we're in a position to have a public forum. And with that, unless there's anything else, next steps? Next steps. Mike, you want to handle next steps? You're really good at this.
What are our next steps? So, again, we're going to incorporate the feedback we heard today. What I was hearing, there's still a lot of favoritism towards looking at Farmington Avenue extension. As I said, you know, we know there's some challenges with that, but we also know that the city is not ready to take that off the table either and wants to evaluate that in more detail. But clearly from your comments today, that's something we want to continue to look at. So all of these local road configurations, we need your feedback. If there's anything about the Myrtle Street, Ashley Street connection, the Garden Street, or any of the Trident options, please give us your feedback. Either, you know, call us, write us, email us, whatever. Come talk to us after the meeting. We need to start to hone in on some concepts. And then, of course, we're going to continue working on these multimodal station concepts. We heard a few things from you today. The working sessions have been invaluable. We've been getting a lot of great critiques on that. So I think we're continuing to evolve our thinking because of your feedback. And as Rich said, in 2018, you know, we should have a much more refined set of ideas and options to start to roll out to the general public. And you know, we hope that you also attend those as well. Just in wrapping up, is there any other final thoughts, questions? Everybody wants to get out of here? Okay. Thank you again for your attendance, and we look forward to hearing from you all.
My name is J. Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. You spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.